America's favorite pheasant hunting destination, South Dakota, is truly the sum of its parts, an intricately stitched tapestry of the unique traditions and history of its local communities. The areas around Redfield, Huron, Mitchell, Aberdeen, and Winner produce 5 of the 6 largest annual pheasant harvests in the state and combined account for more than 20% of all pheasants harvested. But statistics are cold. They fail to convey the warmth and hospitality that make each of these communities such a desirable place to visit, nor do they provide context for the stories behind the well-earned reputations for quality pheasant hunting each has earned. On the eve of the state's 100th anniversary of pheasant hunting, let's look at the rich pheasant hunting heritage of each of these communities. Redfield. John Solheim, former curator of Redfield's Chicago and Northwestern Historic Railroad Depot, started hunting pheasant in the area in the early 1930s. Those were very different times, times when pheasant were valued as much as a food source as for recreation. Like a hammer to a carpenter, a shotgun was a tool to a hunter, a means to an end. Dinner for the family. My mother used to remind me not to leave for school without my shotgun. I'd carry it to school, set it in the corner of the classroom, and on my way home I'd shoot a bird or two for dinner, says Solheim. Solheim also recalls the different hunting methods used in those days. Hunting dogs were a luxury. Many families simply couldn't afford the cost of caring for and feeding a dog. Consequently, people, especially youngsters, were used to drive birds toward blockers at the end of a field. They used us kids to flush the birds, laughs Solheim. Any discussion of South Dakota's pheasant hunting history must begin with Redfield, ground zero for the state's now abundant pheasant population, the location of the first successful pheasant plants. In 1908, 3 separate landowners purchased birds from a game farm in Chicago and planted them on their Redfield area properties. From these planted birds sprang the first broods of wild pheasants the following spring. Encouraged by the early success of those first plantings, the South Dakota Department of Game, Fish and Parks took up the stocking effort in 1911. By 1919, the population had grown to an estimated 100,000 birds, enough to host, on October 30, the state's inaugural one-day hunt in Spink County, including Redfield. 200 roosters were harvested, and South Dakota's current pheasant hunting can be traced to the fields of Redfield. As the first community in South Dakota to offer pheasant hunting, also meant Redfield became the first community to reap the economic benefits of out-of-state hunters who flocked to the area by the thousands. Kathy Fink, coordinator for the Redfield Area Chamber of Commerce, says it was common to spot more than 100 planes parked at the local airport on the eve of the pheasant opener. We used to call it the Orange Wave, says Fink, referring to the influx of out-of-state hunters. Some of those out-of-state hunters included celebrities. Movie stars Jimmy Stewart, Clark Gable, and Carole Lombard, as well as daredevil Evel Knievel, were among those drawn to the great pheasant hunting in the Redfield area. The magnitude of Redfield's Orange Wave was highly dependent upon the pheasant population. Like most of South Dakota, Redfield experienced wild fluctuations in its pheasant population. Bird populations were strong during periods when good habitat was available, especially when a higher proportion of cropland sat idle, e.g., during the Great Depression and World War II, or when initiatives like the Soil Bank Program or the Conservation Reserve Program provided subsidies to landowners to set aside land for habitat. Conversely, when habitat was scarce, pheasant numbers were low. With great growth comes great competition, and for small towns dependent upon an annual influx of out-of-state hunters, the primary competition comes from full-service, corporate pheasant farms which offer guided hunts, lodging, food and hunting supplies. Shirley Youngworth works at Leo's Good Food, a favorite stop for hunters heading to or returning from the field. When she began waiting on tables 54 years ago, the restaurant was filled with out-of-state hunters during pheasant hunting season. Many of those hunters are still regular customers, and some have passed the tradition along to their children and grandchildren. Youngworth has seen firsthand the impact full-service hunting lodges have had on local businesses. 50 years ago, we used to stay open until 11 p.m., serving breakfast, lunch and dinner to hungry hunters. Now we close at 1:30 p.m., she says. Despite the increased competition, business is still good, and the overall economic impact of the region's great pheasant hunting has been positive. The 100th anniversary of pheasant hunting is a significant milestone for the state of South Dakota and an acknowledgement of Redfield's place in pheasant hunting history. To commemorate the occasion, Redfield is planning a special one-day pheasant hunt on October 30, 2019, exactly 100 years after the hunt that started it all. Aberdeen. As one of the best places in the country to take pheasants, Aberdeen prides itself in its history of giving back. Known as the hub city of the Dakotas, because 4 different railroads once converged there, Aberdeen was a major stopover for troops on their way to deployment overseas during World War II. The depot used by the troops was known as the Aberdeen Pheasant Canteen, because volunteers from Aberdeen would distribute pheasant sandwiches to the departing troops. During its 2.5 years of operation, the canteen served pheasant sandwich lunches to more than 586,000 servicemen and women. The Aberdeen Pheasant Canteen may have closed decades ago, but the tradition of welcoming out-of-state visitors with a handshake and a pheasant sandwich, made from the same recipe as those served to WW II soldiers, continues today. "We're the first people they see when they arrive at the baggage carousel," says Casey Wisemantel, chairman of the Aberdeen Visitors Bureau. Aberdeen also has a Paint the Town Orange campaign, where local businesses provide special pheasant hunting-themed t-shirts, water bottles, bandanas for dogs, and informational packets for visiting hunters. Local chefs compete in a pheasant sandwich cook-off. Despite the abundance of pre-hunt promotions, Aberdeen's hunting never fails to live up to the hype. Chris Goldade, president of the Northern South Dakota Pheasants Forever (PF) chapter and the regional habitat manager for South Dakota Game, Fish and Parks, credits the large amount of public land, which makes it especially popular with visiting hunters who may not have easy access to private land. According to Goldade, Brown County is also the #1 county in the state for Conservation Reserve Program acres. The right mix of cropland and grassland makes ideal habitat for pheasant, says Goldade. Mitchell. 4 generations of the Robertson family have been guiding pheasant hunters in the Mitchell, South Dakota area since the 1950s. The family business, currently operated by Jim Robertson, caters almost exclusively to out-of-state hunters, some of whom have been clients for more than 25 years. Robertson credits this loyal customer base to the fact that visitors are treated like family, a mindset that dates to Robertson's grandparents. The same can be said of the community of Mitchell itself, where out-of-state visitors are often welcomed like visiting relatives. Decades ago, there weren't enough hotels in town to handle all the visiting hunters, so us guides just put them up ourselves, says Robertson. That hospitality was often returned in kind by guests who would purchase household items, e.g., furniture, linens, etc., for their hosts before heading home. It's fitting that a community known for its hospitality is also home to one of the most iconic tourist attractions in the Midwest, the Corn Palace. 500,000 people travel from across the United States and Canada each year to visit this architectural tip of the cap to agriculture, with its murals painted with kernels of colored corn and other grains. The Corn Palace hosts concerts, basketball games, weddings and events, including the annual banquet of the Pheasant Country Pheasants Forever chapter. Dave Allen is in his 12th year as president of the chapter and is proud of the fact that his banquet draws more attendees than any PF chapter in the United States or Canada. Huron. A 26-foot-tall rooster pheasant greets visitors to Huron, which is appropriate, considering Huron is home to one of the densest pheasant populations in the country. What makes Huron so special is its abundance of cattail sloughs, ideal late-season habitat. Huron's proximity to the James River watershed creates this unique cattail slough habitat, says Travis Runier, Huron resident and senior upland game biologist for the South Dakota Department of Game, Fish and Parks. During the 1940s, when South Dakota's population of wild pheasants was at its peak and pheasant hunting was gaining nationwide recognition, the city of Huron leveraged the appeal of a different kind of field, a baseball field, to lure out-of-state hunters to their community. Huron's annual festival combined America's love of baseball with its love of bird hunting. See A Fine Time on the Prairie, UA, Winter 2018. Huron, like other South Dakota communities who depend on revenue from out-of-state hunters, works with local businesses to welcome and support hunters. As in other South Dakota communities, local businesses have undergone a change in both the volume of and time spent by visiting hunters. Laurie Shelton, President and CEO of the Huron Chamber and Visitors Bureau, points out that competition from large full-service lodges isn't the only factor impacting local businesses. As more and more hunters hold off visiting until after Thanksgiving, the concentration of non-resident hunters is more evenly distributed across a wider time frame. We actually put most of our promotional effort into driving participation in the late hunt, says Shelton, adding that quite often at that time of the season, the hunting is better than earlier since most of the crops will be down, and there will be fewer hunters in the fields. Winner, 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 pheasant dinner. Competition seems to be part of Winner's DNA. It was literally named because it was the winner in a competition to establish a town along the Chicago Northwestern Railroad right-of-way in 1909. At one point, the town competed with Redfield for the right to call itself the pheasant capital of the world, a dispute that was ultimately resolved amicably. Building on the competition theme, on the second weekend of each December, Winner hosts an annual hunting competition, the Sharpshooter Classic, to generate funds for additional hunting and tourism initiatives. The competition is limited to 15 teams and is open to out-of-state and local hunters. Each team of 6 hunters is given 1 box of shells to try to harvest its collective 18 rooster limit, 3 roosters per hunter, from property pre-selected for them by a random drawing. The team harvesting the most birds with the fewest shots wins. An experiment that began on a few small farms near Redfield, South Dakota, a century ago has evolved into the most celebrated pheasant hunting destination in the United States. Communities throughout South Dakota have left their own marks on this statewide success story, and their unique contributions can be part of every bird hunter's bucket list hunt. Republished with permission from South Dakota's Big Five for Pheasant Hunting. By Jeff Nedwick, 2019. The Upland Almanac, Spring 2019. 2019 by Jeff Nedwick.